Good Sunday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for February the 12th. Today we are reading together in Genesis chapter 49, which is the chapter that contains the blessings of Jacob toward his sons, the blessings that he gives to his sons, the 12 sons of Israel. And within these blessings, we're going to see details concerning really a lot of Jacob's thoughts towards them in some ways. And then these blessings are different than what we might expect in that they often carried a prophetic element to them. So Jacob is going to speak to them concerning what is going to happen to them in the future. And often as we look throughout scripture and examine the historical events of the tribes following this, we're going to see where these things did in fact come into play, whether very specifically in various ways or just generally speaking as well. Thanks so much for tuning in on this Sunday morning. Let me go ahead and get the text of Genesis 49 up on the screen for us. We'll read the text together and then come back and talk about a few of the details that are found within these blessings. Genesis 49, verse number 1. Then Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather around, and I will tell you what will happen to you in the days to come. Come together and listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to your father Israel. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength and the first fruits of my virility, excelling in prominence, excelling in power. Turbulent as water, you will not excel, because you got into your father's bed and you defiled it. He got into my bed. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their knives are vicious weapons. May I never enter their council. May I never join their assembly. For in their anger they kill men, and on a whim they hamstring oxen. Their anger is cursed, for it is strong, and their fury, for it is cruel. I will disperse them throughout Jacob and scatter them throughout Israel. Judah, your brothers will praise you, and your hand will be on the necks of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. Judah is a young lion. My son, you return from the kill. He crouches. He lies down with a lion or a lioness who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, or the staff from between his feet, until he whose right it is comes, and the obedience of the peoples belongs to him. He ties his donkey to a vine, and the colt of his donkey to the choice vine. He washes his clothes in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. Zebulun will live by the seashore, and will be a harbor for ships, and his territory will be next to Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between the saddlebags. He saw that his resting place was good, and the land was pleasant. So he leaned his shoulder to bear a load and became a forced laborer. Dan will judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a snake by the road, a viper beside the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider falls backwards. Verse 18, I will wait for your salvation, Lord. Or Yahweh, the covenant name of the Lord now returns. Verse 19, Gad will be attacked by raiders, but he will attack their heels. Asher's food will be rich, and he will produce royal delicacies. Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. 22, verse 22, Joseph is a fruitful vine beside a spring. Its branches climb over the wall. The archers attacked him, shot at him, and were hostile toward him. Yet his bow remained steady, and his strong arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, by the name of the shepherd of the rock of Israel, by the God of your father who helps you, and by the Almighty who blesses you who blesses you with blessings of the heavens above, blessings of the deep that lies below, and blessings of the breasts of and the womb. The blessings of your father excel the blessings of my ancestors, and the bounty of the ancient hills. May the rest of the head of Joseph, may they rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince of his brothers. Finally, verse 27, Benjamin is a wolf. He tears his prey. In the morning, he devours the prey, and in the evening, he divides the plunder. These are the tribes of Israel, 12 in all. And this is what their father said to them. He blessed them, and he blessed each one with a suitable blessing. Then he, being Jacob, commanded them, I'm about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my ancestors in the cave in the field of Ephron, the Hethites. The cave is in the field of Machpelah, near Mamre, in the land of Canaan. This is the field Abraham purchased from Ephron, the Hethites, as burial property. Abraham and his wife are buried there. Isaac and his wife Rebekah are buried there. And I buried Leah there. The field and the cave in it were purchased from the Hethites. And when Jacob had finished giving charges to his sons, he drew his feet into his bed, took his last breath, and was gathered to his people. Genesis chapter 49. All right, so in the previous chapter, we see the blessing that Jacob gave to the two sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. He adopted them as his own sons and actually gave them a portion of the inheritance. They were going to receive not just one portion, but two portions of the land, whereas Joseph, we're not going to see Joseph having any land for himself as a full tribe. Ephraim and Manasseh will have that. And then the fact there are two of them, that equals the double blessing. Well, you might be thinking, okay, well, what about the other tribes then? If you have the normal 12 sons, if Joseph doesn't have any land for himself, a specific land, and then you take away one, but you add two, well, we still are a little out of whack as far as the balance of the scales go. So how exactly is that going to work? Well, we're going to see that because of some behavior of some previous some previous behavior of some of the sons, we're going to see how all that math kind of shakes out here, because there are some actions that have been previously committed by specifically the first three sons in birth order that would cause for them to not receive a full inheritance here. They would not receive specific land for themselves once they get into the promised land. So those three sons, to begin with, would be Reuben. Reuben is the firstborn, so he ideally, you would think, would be the one to receive the majority of the blessings. He would receive the blessing, he would receive the inheritance. And it's set up as if that's the case. Again, whenever Jacob speaks to Reuben, he says, Reuben, you are my firstborn, you are my strength, the first fruits of my virility, excelling in prominence, excelling in power. You're just thinking, oh, this is set up. Reuben's really going to be seen to be this really successful guy, except he had a major fall, didn't he? Because Jacob goes on to say about Reuben that you will not excel. And specifically, he highlights the fact that you got into your father's bed. This goes back to the incident where he took Bilhah to be his own wife. Jacob says, you defiled it. And then it's almost as if he turns to the brothers and points to Reuben and says, he got into my bed. He got in my bed. And because of that, he's going to fall from firstborn status. He's not receiving the inheritance. He's not receiving the blessing. We're going to go on to the next. Well, the next two would be Simeon and Levi. And yet, with them, they're not going to receive it either, because they have this very dark past, going back to Genesis chapter 34, where they killed the city belonging to Shechem. Again, their knives are vicious weapons. May I never enter into their council. May I never join their assembly. For in their anger they kill men, and on a whim they hamstring oxen. That whole ordeal, whether this is talking about literal oxen being hamstrung, which makes them useless and they eventually die, or whether this is referring to leaders of Shechem, regardless, there was no regard for life. And for that, their anger is cursed. It is strong, their fury, it is cruel. And I will disperse them throughout Jacob and scatter them throughout Israel. So they don't have any land for themselves. Levi, obviously, is from where the priests are going to come. They're going to end up having 48 cities or something like that scattered around Canaan, where they are able to perform their priestly duties. But Simeon also does not, or ends up being a very weak tribe, ends up eventually just kind of being absorbed into Judah. It just never really accounts to anything. It shares land with Judah in many ways. Simeon also in Deuteronomy 33 is not going to be mentioned. It's also not going to be blessed in Deuteronomy 33 as they're preparing to go into the promised land. And then going back to Reuben as well, I should mention this. Again, these blessings are blessings in some ways, but they're also predictions of the future, and there are no real leaders that ever come from Reuben. So you think he was the person who was in a leadership position, he falls short of that. So none of his descendants ever rise to a leadership position either. So whether it be Reuben, Simeon, or Levi, all of these three men and the tribes that are going to come from them, they don't end up being anything great or special. They don't inherit the full inheritance and blessing of God because of their decision making. So next it comes to Judah, and Judah is certainly the one to whom we're going to see, maybe in some sense, the greatest blessing. I guess really looking at it in the grand scheme of things, it is the greatest blessing because he's the one to whom the blessing is given. He's the one through whom the Messiah is going to eventually come. So he speaks to Judah, says, your brothers will praise you, which is the meaning of Judah's name, and it means praise. So there's a play on the name here. Your hand will be on the necks of your enemies. Your hand will be on the necks of your enemies. There's going to be a military might that's going to be seen in the future concerning Judah. He also speaks of your father's sons will bow down to you, which is a reversal of what we've seen previously. It speaks of Judah being a young lion, a lion, a lioness. There's some character development that ends up taking place within his story, and we see that going back to chapter 37, of course, or chapter 38. Let me make sure I get this right. 38. Yes, 38. Where he's in a really bad spot, but then he ends up coming back to his family, ends up coming back to God, and assumes a leadership position among his brothers. And this is all going to lead to verse number 10, that the scepter will not depart from Judah, or the staff from between his feet. This is the blessing. This is rule. This is royal power that's going to come from Judah. And of course, it is through his lineage that the Messiah is eventually going to come, and he's going to have this power until he whose right it is comes, and the obedience of the peoples belongs to him. I believe all these being references to Jesus eventually, but this is all going to speak about the Davidic line that's going to come through Judah, and there's going to be tremendous blessings. There's going to be excessive and immense blessings that come through Judah because of this. That's described in verses verses 11 and 12. Zebulun talks about he's going to be toward the seashore. And one interesting note about Zebulun is that Jesus is actually a Zebulunite by residence. He lives in Galilee, does a lot of his work in Galilee. So that's a cool connection with Zebulun. Issachar just seems kind of lazy and submissive. And he's not significant really at all in the story of the Judges specifically. Nothing really happening with him. Dan is going to judge the people, and it is the tribe to the furthest north. It's one of the smaller tribes, and yet it's going to show itself to be very strong in some ways in a negative sense, because there's a lot of idolatry that is associated with Dan. Verse 18, this random line which says, I will wait for your salvation, Lord. So many of these blessings that Jacob is giving to his sons might makes them out to be kind of strong men on their own. Judah, a strong lion, Issachar, a strong donkey, Dan's a judge, he's a snake, he's a viper, but really, all these things belong to God. He is the one who is truly given the blessings. Gad is is often attacked. He's going to be on the eastern side of the Jordan, so he's going to grow into a strong warrior. Asher, really just going to have his name meaning fortune. He is blessed with fortune in the future. Naphtali, being fleet of foot, might have something to do with what we see in Judges 4 and 5. Joseph, you can read the blessing that's given to him in a couple different ways. You can read this as a recognition of how he has been blessed previously, or you can read this as a recognition of how he's going to be blessed in the future. Depending on how you read that would be how you would interpret what's said there. And then finally with Benjamin, who just seems just not very active. Benjamin is kind of being thrown about. Everybody just tells him where to go and what to do, but he is told that he's a wolf. He tears his prey, devours the prey, divides the plunder, probably speaking to the future military might of Benjamin, that we'll see as the story of the children of Jacob goes on. Well, then we get to verse number 28. These are the tribes of Israel, 12 in all, and this is what their father said to them. He blessed them, and he blessed each of them with a suitable blessing. The emphasis here clearly on the reality that these are blessings. These are blessings. And then he recognizes that he's about to die, and he says, hey, again, let me emphasize to you, though I've told you before, I'm about to die, and I want my bones buried in that cave. I want to be there, because that is the land that God has promised to us, and I want to make sure that my bones are buried there. And then, kind of in dramatic fashion, verse 33, when Jacob had finished giving charges to his sons, he drew his feet into the bed, took his last breath, and was gathered to his people. Jacob's there blessing everybody, delivering these really strong words, and then boom, next thing we know, he's dead. Kind of dramatic for the ending of Jacob here within the story of Genesis. But one of the things to recognize about this is that this is not just Jacob blessing his sons. This is also a work of God. That God is the one who obviously knows the future and knows how things are going to work out. And he's working together with Jacob to make sure that these blessings are appropriate, that they are given as they ought to be given. And of course, it's God, as these blessings are given, and with the fact that there is a prophetic nature to them, God's going to be the one to make sure that these things are carried out. So as we're making our way right to the doorstep at the end of Genesis, again, God is the one who is at work. And we need to recognize the role that he is playing in all this. He is really the one that's making all of this happen. And it is simply the men of this family and the family as a whole, which are able to be participants here in the workings of God. Tomorrow we have Genesis chapter 50. And that will conclude our read through Genesis. We'll have a day off on Tuesday to do a little catch up. And then we'll get back at it on Wednesday, reading through Exodus chapter 1. I appreciate you tuning in for a little bit of reading today before we get off to our Bible studies and our worship assembly. I'm excited to preach today on the issue of jealousy and how jealousy is a very interesting topic. It's an interesting idea and concept because it's a bit complicated. We might think that jealousy in and of itself is just an entirely negative thing. And yet we're going to see where there is a positive spin to jealousy as well, and actually a way in which we should be a jealous people. I'm excited to talk about that with you today, and I hope that you are looking forward to our time together as well. Have a great rest of your Lord's Day, everyone. We'll be back at it again tomorrow. Take care, and God bless.